That's
thing?
a very good question. I like that. You've answered the question.
Steven Spielberg doesn't yell. He doesn't demand. He watches. Then he chooses. And when he chooses, it's final. For over 5 decades, Spielberg has shaped the emotional grammar of cinema, building worlds, rewriting history, and working with more acting legends than any director alive. But behind the cameras, there's something deeper. His ability to find the one. He doesn't cast noise. He casts gravity. His films echo through generations, but at their core is always a performance anchoring the chaos. These are the 6 actors Steven Spielberg never stopped orbiting. 1. Tom Hanks, the twin Spielberg never had. Some filmmakers find collaborators. Steven Spielberg found a soulmate. When Tom Hanks entered Spielberg's orbit, it wasn't just casting. It was destiny. Their bond would go on to define not just individual films, but the emotional tone of entire decades of American cinema. From Saving Private Ryan to Catch Me If You Can, The Terminal, Bridge of Spies, and The Post, their partnership remains one of the most enduring in Hollywood history. And its foundation isn't glitz, fame, or friendship. It's trust. Hanks once said, "When Steven calls, I don't ask what it is. I just say yes." That's not hyperbole. That's code, the sacred kind, forged between 2 storytellers who speak the same unspoken language. Spielberg has entrusted Hanks with his most delicate material, the moral hell of war, the silence of loneliness, the ambiguity of politics and power. And Hanks, without fail, shows up without noise, without ego, without fanfare. On the set of Saving Private Ryan, Spielberg famously gave minimal direction. A nod, a whisper, nothing more. He didn't have to. Hanks found the truth in stillness. When Hanks stepped into the role of Ben Bradley in The Post, Spielberg said it was like watching a lion step quietly into his kingdom. No roar. Just wait. Just presence. But what makes Hanks essential isn't his acting range. It's his invisible discipline. He doesn't steal scenes, he centers them. Other actors bring fire. Hanks brings oxygen, the kind Spielberg needs to breathe life into every frame. And it's not just professionalism, it's rhythm. Their working relationship flows with the kind of unspoken timing that can't be taught or rehearsed. There's no need for long conversations, on-set bonding, or public declarations. The trust is baked in. Every glance, every pause, every silence between them is fluent. It's creative shorthand, carved from years of shared gravity. Hanks never tried to impress Spielberg. He just showed up, prepared, focused, humble. And Spielberg, in return, gave him something more lasting than applause: legacy. This isn't just collaboration. It's creative fusion, a rare bond in an industry built on brief contracts and shorter attention spans. It began the first time they met, and without ever needing to say it aloud, it simply never ended. 2. Daniel Day-Lewis, the president who made Spielberg let go. Steven Spielberg doesn't give up control easily. He plans, he measures, he sculpts every frame. But when Daniel Day-Lewis became Abraham Lincoln, Spielberg didn't just direct, he surrendered. This wasn't a role filled through auditions. There was no casting call, no test shoot. Day-Lewis doesn't act in the conventional sense, he transforms. And when he finally said yes to Lincoln, after years of declining Spielberg's earlier offers, it felt less like a contract and more like a spiritual agreement. By the time he walked onto set, Lincoln was already present. Spielberg later recalled, "He gave me the gift of time travel. There were moments I forgot we were making a movie." That wasn't exaggeration. Day-Lewis didn't wear the costume. He carried the weight of a presidency in his breath. There were no casual interactions, no jokes between takes. Spielberg called him Mr. President on and off set, not out of theater, but out of reverence. It was the only way to respect the sanctity of what Day-Lewis had become. What followed was a performance carved in whispers and stillness. No explosive monologues, no grand gestures, just quiet tension and deep empathy. It was as if Day-Lewis had pulled Lincoln's soul from history and placed it gently on camera. And Spielberg, the most meticulous of directors, stepped aside. In interviews, he admitted, "I didn't direct him. I witnessed him." That kind of humility from Spielberg is rare. But Day-Lewis demanded it, not with arrogance, but with immersion. He didn't need guidance. He needed space. The result was one of Spielberg's most critically revered films. Lincoln earned Day-Lewis his 3rd Academy Award. But more than awards, it left Spielberg changed. Day-Lewis had shown him that silence could be louder than speeches. That stillness could move mountains. They never worked together again. Not because of conflict, but because they had nothing more to prove. The storm had passed. Lightning had struck once, and once was enough. For a director who's shaped so many legends, Daniel Day-Lewis remains the only one who made Spielberg step back, breath held, watching not a performance, but a resurrection. Number 3, Harrison Ford, the frame that held Spielberg's heroes. Before Indiana Jones became legend, Harrison Ford walked onto Spielberg's set with a whip, a hat, and a smirk. That moment didn't just ignite a franchise. It established a mythology, and at its heart was a man Spielberg didn't just direct, but instinctively understood. To Spielberg, Harrison Ford wasn't just another leading man. He was a compass, someone who could ground fantasy in reality, action in authenticity. Ford brought something few others could, the ability to be larger than life without ever losing the weight of being human. Spielberg once said, "Harrison brings confidence into a room, and when the camera rolls, that confidence becomes myth." That myth was built over decades, through pain, dust, bruises, and absolute loyalty. On Raiders of the Lost Ark, Ford didn't play the hero. He bled for it. The shoots were punishing, the stunts often dangerous. But Ford never asked for a double, never flinched. During The Last Crusade, he insisted on doing a high-risk stunt himself. Spielberg hesitated. Ford looked him in the eye and said, "If I get hurt, you'll know it was worth it." That wasn't bravado. That was trust. A silent handshake between two artists who knew the stakes and shared them. Ford isn't flashy. He doesn't play the Hollywood game. No gossip, no theatrics. He shows up, knows his lines, and delivers with steel-eyed precision. And Spielberg loves him for it. In fact, he said if he were ever to direct another adventure movie, there would still only be one man he'd want in the lead. Because for Spielberg, Ford is more than a star. He's the frame itself. He doesn't compete with the story, he carries it. He gives Spielberg exactly what he needs: presence without ego, strength without show, subtlety that roars. Their relationship was never about excess. It was built on reliability, a rare commodity in a world obsessed with reinvention. Spielberg doesn't need Ford to change. He needs him to remain solid, iconic, eternal. 4 Indiana Jones films, 4 testaments to a bond that never required explanation. Spielberg never had to wonder what he'd get from Ford. And in a career full of chaos and creativity, that kind of quiet certainty became something sacred. Harrison Ford didn't just star in Spielberg's films. He defined them. 4. Leonardo DiCaprio. The scalpel. Spielberg didn't see coming. When Spielberg met Leonardo DiCaprio, the world still saw a boy. The sun-soaked face of Titanic, the heartthrob of a generation. But Spielberg saw something else entirely. Not softness, not fame, but precision. He didn't see a star. He saw a scalpel. Their first and only collaboration, Catch Me If You Can, came at a turning point. DiCaprio had just stepped off the shipwreck of global adoration. He could have coasted on charm, but Spielberg saw restraint, control, a young man walking a tightrope over chaos and never flinching. DiCaprio played Frank Abagnale, a con man in a tailored suit. But what made the role land wasn't the confidence, it was the desperation hiding behind it. Spielberg leaned into that tension, and Leo delivered a performance that was sharp, wounded, and quietly devastating. In interviews, Spielberg said, "He's got a clock inside him. He never misses a beat." That's not just praise, that's awe. Spielberg marveled at how DiCaprio read scripts like maps, how he asked questions no one else dared to, and how, even as the youngest person on set, he carried the emotional weight like a veteran. There were no tantrums, no vanity, just raw, instinctive professionalism. Leo didn't guess, he landed. And in doing so, he redefined himself, not just as a star, but as a serious actor with depth and grit. Catch Me If You Can didn't just earn critical acclaim. It gave DiCaprio a turning point, and Spielberg the kind of collaborator he wasn't used to finding in someone so young. Their working chemistry was clean, minimal, precise, like the film itself. There were rumors afterward of more, a Howard Hughes biopic, a courtroom drama. The projects never aligned, but Spielberg never stopped praising him. He once called DiCaprio's performance in The Revenant devastating and said he hoped to work with him again. Because what DiCaprio brings isn't just talent. It's that rare ability to carry chaos in his eyes and silence in his voice. A combination Spielberg finds magnetic. One film, one role, one unforgettable impact. Sometimes a single performance is enough to etch a name into a director's permanent memory. DiCaprio entered Spielberg's world quietly, but left a mark that never faded. Number 5. Meryl Streep, the symphony Spielberg, waited decades to conduct. For nearly 40 years, Steven Spielberg admired Meryl Streep from afar. She was the embodiment of craft, an actress whose very presence could change the temperature of a scene. But he waited, not out of hesitation, but out of reverence. And when the moment finally came in 2017 with The Post, it wasn't just casting, it was a tribute. The film moved fast, chasing a moment of political urgency. Streep stepped in late, but when she arrived, she owned the room. As publisher Katharine Graham, she didn't overpower. She didn't perform with noise. She dissolved into stillness, making every pause more powerful than a speech. Spielberg, who's directed some of the greatest performances in cinema, admitted that for the first time in decades, he felt nervous giving direction. That wasn't fear, it was awe. Directing Meryl, he said, is like conducting a symphony with only one instrument. Her rhythm was internal, her timing surgical. She didn't dominate scenes, she absorbed them. Every breath, every glance, every hesitation, calculated, but never mechanical. Spielberg gave her space, and in return, she gave him something rare. Leadership through quiet. On set, she didn't demand, she listened. She interpreted his vision through nuance, not volume. Spielberg later called her performance a masterclass in restraint, and audiences agreed. The Post earned her a 21st Oscar nomination, but even that number doesn't explain the magic. Because what Spielberg saw in Streep wasn't just excellence, it was essentiality. He compared her presence to Daniel Day-Lewis, surgical, interior, deeply human. In a rare moment of emotion, he said, "There are very few actors who don't need the room. Meryl is the room." They've only worked together once. But that once was enough. Spielberg doesn't measure relationships by repetition. He measures by impact. And the impact of Streep's single performance still echoes through how he talks about cinema, about women, about power. He said he would drop everything to collaborate with her again. Not because it's unfinished business, but because it's a chapter he'd gladly revisit. In a career defined by control, Spielberg gave Streep silence. And she filled it with purpose. Sometimes, all it takes is one film, one room, one woman, and a director walks away saying, "I'll never forget her eyes." Number 6, Robin Williams, the wild heart that saved Spielberg's spirit. Robin Williams didn't just play Peter Pan in Hook. He rescued Steven Spielberg when the director was quietly falling apart behind the camera. The production of Hook was one of the hardest in Spielberg's career. It was expensive, chaotic, emotionally draining. Spielberg, a man who thrives on control, felt like the film was slipping through his fingers. The pressure was crushing. And that's when Robin stepped in. But not on set. After. Every night after shooting, Williams would call Spielberg, not to talk about scenes or lines, but to make him laugh. He'd improvise for 15 minutes, playing characters, telling stories, lifting Spielberg out of the spiral of stress. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't planned. It was pure generosity. A quiet act of emotional rescue that Spielberg would never forget. The movie itself may not have landed the way Spielberg hoped. He later admitted it was too big, too messy, too bloated. But when he looked back on that experience, what remained wasn't disappointment. It was Robin. On screen, Williams gave Peter Pan something no one expected: sadness, a weight, the ache of forgotten youth, the quiet tragedy of growing up. He turned Neverland into something personal, and Spielberg saw it, saw the layers, the heartbreak, the humanity. Their friendship lasted long beyond the film. Years later, when Robin passed away, Spielberg was so devastated that he halted production on Schindler's List. He said the world had lost its lightning in a bottle, and the room, ever since, had felt dimmer. They never worked together again, but they didn't have to. Because Williams didn't just give a performance, he gave Spielberg himself, his heart, his humor, his chaos, his care. He became the one wild, unpredictable force that Spielberg, the king of control, allowed to just be. And that, in Spielberg's world, is the rarest gift of all. When Spielberg speaks about the actors who changed him, he always comes back to Robin. Not because he was the most refined, but because he was the most alive, the most present, the most human. For Spielberg, Robin Williams wasn't just a collaborator. He was a lifeline. And in one unforgettable film, in one heartbreaking laugh, he reminded the director why stories matter at all. 6 names, 1 legacy. Steven Spielberg rarely talks about favorites. He talks about moments, fleeting, fragile, unforgettable moments when the camera disappears and all that remains is truth. These 6 actors didn't just deliver lines, they centered his worlds. They brought silence where others brought noise, presence where others brought performance. They changed not just the scenes, but Spielberg himself. Tom Hanks gave him consistency, humility, and emotional grounding. Daniel Day-Lewis showed him what surrender to craft truly looks like. Harrison Ford became the eternal compass of adventure and strength. Leonardo DiCaprio revealed precision in youth and chaos beneath charm. Meryl Streep transformed silence into leadership, restraint into command. And Robin Williams, he gave him joy when Spielberg had lost it, and reminded him that sometimes the wildest hearts carry the deepest truths. These aren't just 6 collaborations. They're 6 gravitational forces, pulling Spielberg's storytelling into sharper focus, frame by frame, film by film. Not all of them returned. Not all of them needed to. Because when Spielberg casts, he doesn't chase headlines. He chases gravity, the kind that lingers long after the credits roll. And these 6, they were never just actors. They were the anchors of his cinema.